Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. I'm going to talk to you today about God because, hey, that's what I do. What am I going to say? I'm going to talk about, actually, I'm going to mention that book a little bit, Francesco Stavropoulos' book, God and Anatomy, where that talks about how God is a corporeal entity, the God of the Hebrew Bible, that is, that walks amongst humans, that has body parts, that is, you know, a real tangible thing. Now that is a version of God of the Christian Bible, if we say as a whole. That is a version of God, this Yahweh iteration, that I think many modern Christians have an issue with. And the reason is because they have seen this evolution that's taken place over time, where God has been abstracted out of the Bible. The modern God is an abstract entity, this omni God that exists outside of the universe, that doesn't walk amongst us, that isn't uh, essentially doesn't have a gender, that has no sex. It's just indeed that's why in one of my recent books, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan, and Divine Design, which I think you should all go and grab. Um, I was really careful in that to use the pronoun it for God. Hey, we love talking about pronouns, right? Well, I don't think God is a he or she, and I think the fact that we call God a he is problematic because I think it humanizes God more than is warranted. And I think God is an entity, is an it. But it's really difficult to write a book just calling God it. It gets quite confusing in terms of pronouns because you use it in other contexts and other ways, and you're just so used to writing he and his. But anyway, that's by the by. Now, this modern iteration of God, this abstract entity, is as a result of philosophers and theologians uh, tackling thorny issues that have arisen. And so God has had to move and adapt to criticisms that philosophers, that any kind of thinker has thrown at the God concept. And so it's moved to be this all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful deity, this omni-God, omniscience, uh, omnibenevolence, and omnipotence. But the problem is, and this is the problem that many modern Christians face, is that those two iterations of God, the one that is the Yahweh of the Hebrew Bible and the omni God, the abstract omni God, are I don't think they're coherent. There is an incoherence between those two ideas. So you can't, on the one hand, be this thing, this abstract entity that is kind of philosophical notion of a god, and also be this thing that walks around and can't find Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and has buttocks, and then has a face that Moses has seen, and all this kind of stuff. And there's an issue. And as 2000 years has seen that abstraction take place, where people are now up here with this idea of an abstract God, then at times when they're having to defend the Hebrew Bible, they're having to go back down to this original version of God that is not evolved. And it's a very simplistic idea, a very anthropomorphic, sorry, idea of God, and I think there's a tension there, and I see that when you argue often with Christians, for example, they might much prefer arguing about these philosophical ideas of God, but when you start challenging them on the Hebrew Bible claims, they get a bit uncomfortable, and they have to try and uh, you know wrap their heads around how these two different gods effectively can coexist with them as one. And they have to try and justify the claims in the Bible in some way. And often it's the case that, hey, these are just symbolic claims, these are just kind of allegories or whatnot. But then, that's at loggerheads with what literalists would say, which is these are really true accounts of what happened. And some of those kind of earlier stories in the Bible I don't think can be seen as purely symbolic. There are many claims in the Exodus story, and in some of the Pentateuch or the Torah, the first five books of the Bible, that clearly are to be read as God actually doing these things and having body parts and existing in a much more simplistic manner. And I just think these are two, as I say, mutually exclusive ideas of God. And I think this kind of plays into the idea that there is a tension between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I think so many modern Christians would know their way around the New Testament and are much more comfortable with the New Testament because the Old Testament throws up these sorts of issues. And I the problem is for many modern believers and even non-believers who don't look that carefully at the Bible, see the Bible as just one continuous narrative, right? From the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, right through into the New Testament. And they think, well, this is all a coherent story that's been pieced together. But actually, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible is full of disparate genres with written by different authors with different agendas, and the New Testament is kind of a bolt on that is essentially, I think, really talking about two different gods, or that is talking about a completely different God than the Hebrew Bible. And so I think this idea of abstraction represent and the tension between those two gods represents tension between the New Testament and the Old Testament. And I don't really think those two parts of the Christian Bible are harmonizable. I think you have just got a huge problem when you are trying to argue that it is indeed a single continuous uh, and coherent narrative, a single story throughout the Hebrew Bible and into the New Testament. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the idea. I've talked about this before in different videos, but I just thought I'd do a separate one to just try and lay that out. I'll be interested to see what you guys think uh, um, about that philosophical evolution of the idea of God, and it's the beginning and the end of that evolutionary journey are mutually exclusive and problematic when placed, in the same space. Anyway, thanks. Take care. Please like, subscribe, and share, and all that kind of stuff. And I will speak to you soon.